I've been interviewing people that either learned a lot of languages or that have learned a language in a couple of months. And yeah, it's been interesting. And so recently I remembered our conversation and I thought it'd be great to have you on.
Cool.
Can you just talk a little bit about which languages you have learned and how that went?
Sure. Well, when I was growing up, my mother spoke Danish to us, so before we ever took any formal language instruction, we were already exposed to the sounds of a foreign language. And then in 7th grade, I started with Latin, formal instruction in Latin, and in 9th grade, I started with French. So I have 6 years of Latin and 4 years of French, and let's see. I guess it was before I started in scholastic language studies. I took the Pimsleur language aptitude test, which everybody did, and I think I got an 8 out of 9, probably just because I grew up with Danish. So that was in the 6th grade. I remember coming out of, sort of the tail end of elementary school. And from then, I didn't take any languages in the university because I passed out of French.
Okay.
It's expensive to take another, to pay to take another language. And I passed out of my requirement. So after university, I picked up Spanish through social channels, but not really through studying.
Right.
Because I met a girl from South America who didn't speak any English really.
Oh, that's perfect.
So, and her whole family was, that's the that tends to be the successful model in my post-university language studies.
Yeah, I mentioned this in my course. What I say is this may not be politically correct advice, but it works. One of my teachers told me that the best way to learn a language is in bed. And then if the person doesn't even speak any English, so you really have no other option but to be immersed 24/7 and really speak the language you're trying to learn around the clock, then it tends to go very fast, right? You really improve very quickly.
It certainly does.
So you grew up speaking English, then you picked up some Danish from your family, Latin and French in school, and then Spanish later on by yourself, just interacting with native speakers that didn't speak English. Can you speak a little bit to that point that you said you spent several years studying these languages in school, but now you realize that really a couple of months would have been enough. Can you speak to that a little bit?
But it is true because after I learned Spanish, I went to Italy with no Italian, absolutely no Italian. It was almost a spur of the moment decision, and I picked up a book, and actually only cracked open the book on the airplane, the Berlitz book, and Berlitz is great.
Okay.
By the time I hit the ground, I actually made it to this small town about 3 hours away through various, train and bus means, only speaking Italian. So,
nice.
It wasn't that hard, but I had the book and I knew what phrases I needed to study. But it's definitely. And so 3 or 4 days into my stay in Italy, I met a local girl, and we got romantic.
That seems to be the success formula.
Yeah. So, not that you want to exploit the locals just for language, but hey, they want to exploit you just for your English. That's
that is
the
true.
thing.
Yeah.
So
if you can do a tandem where you speak in English half the time and Italian half the time, that's a fair trade, right?
Sure, except it never works out that way. It always, I think you know this unless you really make an effort.
Yeah.
It always becomes almost like an arm wrestle thing. Like whoever is, more persistent in trying, it just falls over into that. So,
Gotcha. Gotcha.
We never speak. She and I never speak English.
You are the
and
more
here-
persistent one.
I guess, more confident.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think like during social interaction, it can become a bit tiresome as well if the language just isn't there yet, because you really do want to communicate and not just practice all day long. But maybe for an hour a day, you can actually just do exercises together, and then the rest of the time you just let it go, whatever language the communication just happens to come out in.
Sure. And so I've had other experiences with language as well. So I'm in Romania now. I've been here for a total of 1 year.
Nice.
And acum pot să vorbesc românește așa bine, nu perfect, dar it's like that, you know. I mean, I can make myself understood.
That's fantastic.
I can buy groceries, I can get a cab, you know, but I did not have that same, experience I had in Italy because, and so there it was, that hour a day thing. I met somebody who needed help in statistics. She spoke English very well, and my second day there in the youth hostel, and I sort of traded out after I spent, 8 or 10 hours trying to get her through her, her statistics studies, which actually was a little bit of an effort to understand how to teach math in Romanian,
Right.
with no Romanian, back and forth to Google. Anyway, so we made a deal that I would come back as often as I wanted and take a little language lesson,
Nice.
and I did. That paid off, but otherwise, so many people here speak English, so I don't have that, that pillow talk experience.
Right. Yeah,
in
it
Romania.
can actually be a disadvantage if you go to a country. Like I'm in the Philippines now again. Since 2 months ago I came back here, and everyone speaks perfect English here, so I never have a chance to practice my Filipino. Like I literally can only say the most basic things, just because you need that practice, right? You need to get away from just studying theory and actually get the practice. And that's a big thing in Brazil. My course is for Brazilians, as you probably know, and they usually spend 5 years in a language school. They spend about $20,000 on a complete course for 5 years, and then many of them still don't speak. Like many of them are still afraid to open their mouth and make mistakes, or they still don't really understand native speakers. And one of the big key components that are missing is this the practical component, right? The actual contact with native speakers. And I've seen that as a pattern, like in all the languages you mentioned, that you sought out contact with native speakers. You found some way to interact with someone from that background and not just stick to the book, right?
And, one thing you mentioned about 45 seconds ago was fear.
Yes.
And that is something that is not really addressed. It's fear of, it depends on the culture you're from, I think in the United States we have a fear of insulting or, I guess just, seeming to be making fun of somebody else. So
Right.
Students who study Spanish in school, a lot of them try to speak it with an American accent, so that maybe because they think that they would be disrespecting, somebody if they end up sounding like, there's also the cultural backdrop of cartoons and comedy where, you see somebody speaking, there's Boris and Natasha who
Right.
speak in a Russian accent, but guess what? I learned Russian out of a book, and my only example was Rocky and Bullwinkle and Boris and Natasha.
Oh wait, you
Right?
speak Russian as well? How much Russian do you speak?
I can't remember much, but for a little while in right after university, in my first job I had a commute, and I picked up this Berlitz book just to pass the time and
Nice.
be constructive.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I The only person I ever got to speak with was like a fourth-year Russian student at University of Chicago, and he said my accent was better than his.
Nice.
So
Nice. That's fantastic.
I think in ninth grade, I did a theater production that kind of got me out of my shell. My drama, our coach was my French teacher, and I think all of this kind of goes hand in hand, that if you aren't afraid to act a fool, and you don't equate putting on an accent with insulting or making fun of your interlocutor, then you are going to make great strides in learning a language, especially the accent.
Right. That's interesting. I've actually seen that recommended outside of language studies in other areas for building confidence is to take theater classes and public speaking classes for people to lose their fear of making a bad impression on people, right? For people to become more confident and more disinhibited, right? I would say your Russian's probably somewhere where my Japanese is, where like years ago I could communicate, but it's gone rusty. But you, how long would you think it would take you to regain that knowledge if you had to go to Russia for an assignment? How long do you think it would take you to just reacquire that proficiency you had?
I would say only on the oral side, probably a month.
A month. Okay.
On the written side, it's hard to tell. It's,
right.
I would hope, that the Cyrillic would kind of just,
go away.
Go away, exactly. No, I would hope it would kind of, I don't know, it's come to me by osmosis and exposure, just seeing the letters up, it would flow. But I know I would be staring at signs for probably the first few days or a couple of weeks, just trying to sound out the sounds. But there's only like 25 or 30 letters in Cyrillic, so it's not like trying to, learn the Chinese character set or something like that.
Yeah, of course. And tell me about this story you mentioned in email when we were working together about your, I'm sorry, was it your cousin, your niece, studying Latin?
So one of my nieces studied Latin, and it was a fight. I mean, that was her first foreign language. I think she's done pretty well in Spanish since then, but it all came back to me. I was sort of her tutor, and that was a little bit difficult for her to have to, answer to her uncle, but her mother was the enforcer, so she ended up with a B in the course. It ended up, she had to do a lot of makeup homework, a ton of studies. It was definitely a bigger workload than any of her other courses, and it was an accelerated one-year course done in a semester, just because they were on a certain kind of experimental school schedule with only 4 courses each, so they would do 8 courses in a year, split over 2 semesters. So
Gotcha.
I know she will have lifelong benefits from having studied Latin.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And you said you studied along with her, and I think one of the comments you made was that with some dedication, you should be able to get some basic proficiency to be able to hold a conversation in, what's the number you said? Was it 3 months or was it 4 months?
I think actually it's always been my experience that in about 2 months I should be able to, 2 months of some sort of serious dedication that I should be able to. I was in Spain for 6 weeks. That was my first exposure. I did, I picked up some books and studied on my own and hung out with locals. I was on my own, completely on my own. So I was, I had to do it. And by the end of 6 weeks, I remember, having kind of a farewell dinner at a family-style restaurant in Barcelona over paella and Spanish wine, and by, I guess, the end of a 2 or 3 hours sitting, I was, talking pretty nicely with strangers from all over the Latin-speaking world.
Awesome.
So
Awesome.
that was 6 weeks.
That's fantastic. Yeah, because the first thing, like, to accomplish anything is you have to believe that it's possible, right? If you think something's impossible, you probably won't.
Sure.
You won't ever be able to do it, right? So just to make sure we're not forgetting anything, this is English, Danish, Latin, French, Russian, Romanian, Italian, and Spanish, like in various degrees of proficiency. Is that a complete list, or any others you've tried on?
That's it. That's
All right.
it. Yeah. Yeah.
And then you said that
most active in Italian, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
One thing you said earlier was that somebody who was actually majoring in Russian, was it that you had better pronunciation than he did? And also your Romanian pronunciation sounded really authentic just now. Like, I have friends from Romania and it sounds just like that. It's not a language I speak, but you seem to have a knack for picking up the pronunciation as well. Can you give some tips about that? How do you do that? How do you get the sounds right?
Okay, so it's really just coming back to mimicry, and I would almost say, just being comfortable imitating. Some people might have to push it to the level of making fun of,
Right.
almost getting in that mindset where they're mocking. Mimicry and mockery they're almost indistinguishable, and
Right.
so whatever it takes, if you can make people laugh by mocking a Frenchman, and the French do this with the Italians do that with the Americans. They're very funny that way, with the R's. They don't have our R.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes
You're
sense.
very friendly, and they don't. But yeah, mimicry and just taking yourself lightly, not being don't take yourself too seriously, because you're going to make a fool of yourself, and it's
Yes.
okay. Be happy, laughing, and and interacting with people, and if somebody. You may have, bad experiences where people, are a little standoffish because they don't like dealing with foreigners or whatever. But you just have to, have a laugh and be confident.
Right.
Let your ego go. Don't have a big ego. And listening. One of those unspoken skills is listening. There's a whole other side of language that is similar to the study of music.
Mm-hmm.
And I am a musician. I was a professional musician, and I've sung and played guitar and
Yeah,
bass.
as have I. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
remember if we talked about that. I was a musician as well until
Wonderful.
4 years ago. Yeah.
Anyway,
Nice.
Listening, having big ears. I also operated a recording studio as an engineer, and I think all those skills, some of them are learned, some of them are innate, but obviously you're not gonna be able to mimic if you can't listen. So
Right.
that's
Nice.
they go hand in hand. Yeah.
Okay, so let's say you had to move to a country where you don't speak the language yet. Let's say Sweden or, I don't know, Finland, just some random country where you don't know anything yet. What would be your first steps? What would you do to get started and to get on the path?
Let's see. So probably practical steps, like finding an apartment. The first, and I think this is critical. If you need to quickly make a transition into a country, it's not just about the language. It's about the practical side. So
Right.
I would learn keywords, keywords that I need to get started first. Even just in researching things, you're going to have better luck trying to find something in the local language than something that caters to the expat.
Oh, for
Your
sure.
prices
Yes.
could be double.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when I came to Romania, the first thing that I learned the words for real estate and rent, and then kind of took it from there, and I wasn't so bold as to try and rent from a Romanian real estate agent, but I did. I found one that spoke English, and having that, just the first early practical vocabulary, even just for reading and trying to do your research about what you need to know is pretty critical. And then, you're going to, if you can at least assimilate some words from other languages, you will, and notice how the suffixes map from one language into another. You're going to do better. If it were Japanese, it'd be a total different thing. I mean, I would have to start with tapes.
Yeah.
I'd have to start with tapes and serious structured study, and it'd be almost like learning a new musical instrument. I don't know, the violin.
Yeah, let me just explain to my students real quick what you just said. The suffixes, for those who don't know, that's the last part, the last syllable of a word. Like, for example, in English, the suffix tion, as in communication, the same word translates to Portuguese as comunicação, and it's really just the suffix, only the last syllable that's different. And if you just know how these suffixes translate, you can just instantly have hundreds, if not thousands, of words in your vocabulary, because except for that last syllable, they're the same, and even that syllable follows the same rule all the time, right? So that really helps a lot.
Yeah. So there is this. There's this phenomenon in languages wherein the most commonly used words mutate the fastest. So the word for to eat in Spanish is comer, and in Italian, right next, very close, is mangiare.
Right.
And French it's manger, and in Romania it's să So there's some families, but one of the most difficult vocabulary groups is the very common words.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Because they mutate.
I didn't know that they mutate
that's what
faster.
I've noticed.
Yeah, interesting.
I mean, yeah, and then one of the easiest wins are the abstract words that are least commonly used, the ones that end in tion, that kind of thing.
Right. But it makes sense if you think about it, because the way languages evolves and mutates and transforms into new shapes of itself is really through slang and through common usage by common people, right? So if the words are not very commonly used, they don't go through that process a lot.
Yeah, like to speak. What is that in Spanish? It's hablar.
Yeah.
In Romanian, it's a să vorbesc. Totally different.
Right.
Even
in Portuguese, it's falar, and then in Italian.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Je parlais.
Yeah, French.
Exactly. Or parlare, similar in French and Italian.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, these are Latin languages, but the word is so common. So. Yep. So yeah, that maybe first 1,000 words of everyday, conversation, that can be kind of tough, except for maybe the numbers, which may be similar, from one to another. But and then,
but then they're also usually pretty short words, right? So that makes it easier than the more complex vocabulary.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So your first step would be to pick up the words you will need first, right? The most practical words for your daily life in the country. And then go from there to the 1,000 most commonly used words. This is so interesting because I haven't told you that, but I just literally say that in my course. Just that exact thing I tell them to
okay.
do. Yeah, even though we
Okay,
haven't
very
spoken about this before the interview, you just said the exact same thing right there, and
Yeah.
it makes sense. It's just a logical step to take, because with 1,000 words you can hold a basic conversation. That's really a pretty good estimate of how many words it takes to hold your own in the language.
Yeah, yeah. And then, depending on the type of language, your grammar may be the next on the agenda of,
Yes.
becoming a respectable speaker. If you're trying to do business, come in and speak the language for business, there's a different level expected,
Right.
So, you do need to know the grammar, and that's a higher level of instruction and effort. And in Japanese, I know there's a whole different. It's almost a different language. The formal business language.
Correct. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. But just to make sure you arrive, to your hotel in a taxi without spending 10 times what you should be spending.
Exactly.
You might be able to do that, just in a week or so. I don't know.
There you go. Yeah, I agree completely. Yeah, and that's the thing, because one of the fads in Brazil that marketers are trying to push is that you don't need to learn grammar. You can learn a language without the grammar. And it's like, well, if you learn a language without the grammar, you're gonna speak it without the grammar, Like if you don't know how to conjugate words, you will probably conjugate them wrong in a conversation, or even worse in a business context, right? I mean,
yeah,
you need to have
can
some...
get away with that. You can get away with it for your first month or
Exactly.
whatever, but
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All depends how far you want to take it, right? I mean, obviously, also, we're not saying that in 3 months you can become a novelist in a language, right? If you really want to take it to, basically the saying goes, to get 95% proficiency, you can do that in 4 months of serious, dedicated study. But to take 100% proficiency, that could really take a couple of years, because these last 5%, you really have to dig into all the details and really take it a whole lot further. It's basically Pareto's law, right?
It's Pareto, yeah.
Exactly. 80% of the causes account for 20% of the results, and the other way around. Yeah.
Yeah, or the law of diminishing returns,
Exactly.
that kind of thing.
Yes, well said. Yeah, I agree.
But you can, if you're also hanging out with encouraging people is really good.
Yeah.
It takes a mixture. I mean, hanging out with positive people, locals who commend you on, even those small wins of learning a new conjugation, or wow, how nicely you speak. That's good. But also, spending time with people who are happy to correct your mistakes is important. My mother.
Go ahead.
My mother always asked us. She was a little annoyed every once in a while, maybe with herself more than anything. But she came to the States with very good English, but she always wanted to do better. So she asked us to correct her, and
Okay.
So go ahead. You said, what?
Oh yeah. It's something interesting that I had never thought of, but this encouragement is a huge deal, because one of the first languages that I learned in a couple of months was Portuguese, and Brazilians are completely like that. They're so happy if you can just say obrigado. They'll be excited that you that you know a little bit of their language, and they're just super encouraging. So I could not agree more. Like, very important to have that positive feedback that will encourage you, right? Because every result you see, every positive little success encourages you to go after more, right?
Yeah. So are you teaching English? Is that one of the languages you teach?
I'm really not teaching English or French or any language specifically. I'm telling them exactly what I did to learn any of the languages that I've learned.
Interesting. So it's sort of a universal course.
Exactly. It's a universal method, and what I didn't even anticipate is that now students are using it to get scholarships in university. One guy is doing his doctor in a foreign country now, and they're applying these techniques to learning programming languages like C++ or PHP, etc. And
wow.
It's really like, it's a general methodology for. It was designed for learning languages, but people are taken it much further than I had anticipated.
Wow, it's sort of a general pedagogical framework, or it could be that.
Yeah, I guess.
Very interesting.
I guess I'll have to take it in that
Yeah.
direction. I'll probably have to
Wow.
do something like that, like specifically take it beyond what I had even planned.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that is too cool. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but people are loving these interviews because in Brazil people are so scared of foreign languages. Like, it's crazy. They're so scared. I didn't even know this until I started this project, but Brazil is among the 10 least English-speaking countries in the world. Like, lower proficiency in English than Iran, lower than Bolivia. It's crazy. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, yeah. Of course, there's other factors. Like in America, you know, you would find, just because of our insular society and the fact that, you know, we're blessed to be part of, you know, the English-speaking world, that, you know, you're going to find that we're some of the least French-speaking people in the world, or, you know, you know, some of the, just in general, some of the worst at any kind of foreign languages.
I mean, you're an exception, really, for,
we're,
like, most Americans don't learn foreign languages much, right? Most Americans rely on English. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a it's a shame.
Yeah.
It's a shame.
Yeah, all right.